Let's talk about ice. Should we be throwing ice on our arm after pitching? In Michigan, we hate the ice. Leave it outside. Guys, leave the ice outside. We hate ice in Michigan. It keeps us from playing. Only thing good about ice when you're growing up is that once in a while you get a snow day. Other than that, it's no fun. You know, trip and fall outside, you fall on your throwing arm, you're hurt. Nothing good happens with ice. And that goes as far as talking about icing your arm after throwing. And while this is a controversial topic, and we put up a video, it had like 33,000 likes on Instagram. It was like our most popular video ever. We were talking about why you probably shouldn't be icing, and we had all these people, I iced back in the 1940s and my arm felt great, whatever they were saying. We'll talk about the science of why icing your arm after throwing may not be optimal, and if you do decide to ice, if you feel like that's something that gives you a great benefit, some things you may want to think about if you're going to use it. Come on over to the whiteboard, we'll talk about the science a little bit. Now, ice we talk about as an anti-inflammatory. Let's first think about it. Your body has built-in processes that are designed to, number one, protect itself from injury, but number two, allow it to recover as fast as possible. The body is designed to recover from injury and from insult from training, whether that's micro trauma or whether that's just a little bit of overworking or over fatigue at times. And that means that there's a little bit of chemical load on the tissue, there's a little bit of inflammation and some built up metabolites, but there's also maybe some breakdown of some tissues a little bit. And the way those tissues heal is by blood. So blood comes through a blood vessel here. So we got a little blood in this blood vessel, kind of here's the inner lining here, but then we have this kind of layer around the blood vessel, and there's smooth muscle in there. Smooth muscle is this kind of muscle, it's like what we have in our digestive system, and it can contract or it can relax. And when we apply cold to one of these blood vessels, what ends up happening is the blood vessel will contract and shrink in size. This smooth muscle ends up kind of shrinking and contracting the blood vessel. And so what happens there is less blood will flow through this vessel now because we've forced it to contract. You may think that's a good thing. We're going to get less fluid into the area. But the problem isn't fluid getting into the area. The real problem is, number one, what happens as a result of occluding some of that fluid in the area. And so what ends up happening is we get less blood in the area. Blood is what heals tissues. That's what heals these muscles as blood kind of flows into different aspects of the muscle, but the tendon and even ligaments where it possibly can, blood comes in, it brings the nutrient supply as well as oxygen, and it allows that muscle to heal. Blood is what brings in the nutrition and the energy sources, the glucose into the muscles, but it also brings in any other proteins or metabolites that are necessary for that muscle to recovery after a bout of training, exercise, or competition. So for a muscle, it's very important to have good blood supply, but it's also important that we have good blood supply to the tendons. And by icing and causing that what we call vasoconstriction, it limits blood into the area, and that can limit blood profusion into an area for up to 12 to 24 hours in some of the research that we're seeing. So it's maybe not so much of a good thing. Now, exercise actually does the inverse. That's low intensity exercise or high intensity exercise, as well as heat, can actually do the opposite and cause vasodilation, where now this blood vessel is engorged with blood. It's bringing more blood in the area, which allows more nutrients to reach the targeted tissues that need to recover. So vasodilation is really our goal as we target recovery. Early on, we may say, hey, we want to not go crazy with the exercise, just let some of the inflammatory processes take place, because our body is intrinsically smart. It knows what it has to do to recover, and if we're going to artificially blunt that process, we better have a good reason. And so this whole process of limiting blood into the area isn't necessarily the right thing, because blood isn't what's causing inflammation and soreness in your tissue. What's causing inflammation and soreness in your tissue is some of the metabolites and waste products that are carried away by the vascular system, but also what we call the lymphatic system. The lymphatic system is like your drainage system. When you look at it, we've all had swollen lymph nodes when we've gotten sick at times, but there's all these kind of spirally little lymphatic vessels underneath the skin, and when we ice, they constrict as well. So they constrict, they limit the fluids that are exiting, the waste products that are exiting an area. So we limit the amount of waste products exiting, which basically means we keep them in the tissue, which continues to make it sore. And then we don't allow good blood supply in by icing. And some of you guys may be about to tune out here because you're like, nah, I don't think so, it helps me. Well, we have something called the placebo effect, and that occurs. And just because we iced in the past, I iced for years after I threw. And it didn't do me any good, despite the fact that I may have believed so at the time. So if you decide that you feel like ice for whatever reason is part of your ritual or it's very important, understand this. And understand that if you constrict the blood vessels, what you need to do is dilate them once again. Open them back up, and that's done through light, low-intensity exercise. We filmed a video on this in the past. Make sure to check that out on post-throwing exercise routines. Here's the other thing. We have skin. We have some subcutaneous fat tissue. We have all these layers before you actually reach the muscle, before you reach the tendon, and before you reach the bone. So this icing that you're doing, it really doesn't penetrate too far. In most of the research, even when you leave the ice on a prolonged period of time, it reaches 3 to 4 millimeters down into the tissue. 3 to 4 millimeters at the most. It's most of the time never reaching the tendons, most of the time never reaching the joints that you want to ice, and it barely gets into the muscle. So this whole thing about icing, it probably reaches about this far down on average. You know, it reaches just the top layer of the muscle. So you're really not hitting the tissue that you want to hit anyway. You're just basically freezing the skin and some of the peripheral vessels as well as the lymphatic vessels that cause drainage. So same reason why I don't think it's effective, because it doesn't reach the target tissue, is the same reason that I don't think it's necessarily catastrophic for you if you want to do it. It's just because it's kind of vanilla. It's benign. It doesn't do a whole heck of a lot, but what it probably does do isn't really that beneficial unless you feel like psychologically it is. And if that's the case, make sure you do some form of light exercise-based activity or some heat after. I'm open to any questions, comments, or concerns on this. I know this can be a triggering video for some people, so drop those in the comment section below, and we may cover them in a future video if I don't address them in the comments here. So go check those out if you have any questions yourself, and maybe I've already answered them below. Hit the sub button. We'll see you in the next one.